So anyways, well, I guess now it's my turn to describe the game that I love. And I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in any sarcastic kind of thing. Well, anyway, in Yu-Gi-Oh, basically there's three kinds of basic cards, which is your monsters. Of course, for reference sake, my favorite
So,
Goki Twist Cobra. Gokis are my favorite archetype. They're actually well, I'm going into lore. No, this is technically they're wrestlers. As a pro wrestling fan, so this is technically my main
reference of the hobby.
Oh yes, definitely.
Alright.
So you have like your monsters, which is technically what you would see on any deck, and I guess just for explanation's sake. Essentially, you can have as many monsters as you want. You can have as many spells as you want, depending on your play style, as long as it fits the 40 to 60 card deck, and if people think it's consistent. And of course, you have your spells. Yeah, and of course, you have your spells. Before anything else, I have to mention this. There are actually many kinds of monsters. There are normal monsters which have no effects. This one that we call like effect monsters, technically because of the and this is another funny thing in Yu-Gi-Oh. There's too much text.
Yes, that's
And
usually what I notice.
and ironically is a lot of people in Yu-Gi-Oh make mistakes on that because some of them don't know how to read.
Because of too much text.
Too much text. I know. So sometimes that's why people they try to memorize it by heart, especially
To us.
essentially and I guess I can go into this. The parts of the monster card technically, of course, from the artwork, in which I guess the different kinds of rarities will go into another video at another time.
Alright, but basically that is your main ways to win the game.
Okay,
Not
technically.
necessarily a win condition, but
Mhm.
ways to attack your opponent.
Essentially in attacking and defending in this case, because it's like this. Each monster card, as much as possible, has an attack number and a defense number, in which sadly Gokis have zero defense, but they have some decent attack power, like the opening monsters technically. And basically, the objective is in Yu-Gi-Oh, you have to get the opponent's life points from 8,000 to 0.
So, alright, so we go to 2,000. How much you boy at 28?
No, 38.
38?
Yeah.
You played two?
I copied them.
God! Ah! Ding, 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 ding. Okay, that just sits on the field for no reason.
And of course, like we mentioned earlier, there's other ways to win.
Yeah.
You can deck out your opponent if he cannot draw anymore.
But it's all the same to us. We have also the same kind of rulings that if you can draw that card, wherever you will lose. But also there are cards that will cancel that effect.
Yeah, exactly. But in a sense, of course, just to add to the parts of the card thingy, of course, each monster card has a level. In a normal sense, we'll get to the other cards soon. They each have attributes, which is
the
earth, fire, water, that kind of stuff. Dark, light, that kind of stuff. And of course, well, and you want to include serial
but
numbers?
again, quick question, but you need mana to pass this. Right?
No, actually, if in Yu-Gi-Oh, as long as you have a level 4 or lower, which is the star, you can tell by the stars. If you have a level 4 or lower monster, you can just normal summon it in attack. Yeah.
Especially to the play.
Oh, trust me, when we get into the demo plays, that's when everything is gonna be revealed. But of course, aside from that, you also have their kinds of every monster has their own. Aside from their attributes, they have their types. This one is warriors. Some of them have zombies. Some of them have dragons. So there's a whole boatload of types.
But that's basically the kind of the deck archetypes in the world. But let's say for the basic kind of interaction, what would be your let's say you're win.
Winning, basically, in terms of winning.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of winning, let's say just for example's sake, right? Let's say just for, I hate to do this to Ash Blossom, but oh, speaking of which, this is a very important card. We'll get to that soon. This is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This is a very important hand traps. Like I said, we'll get to that in the mechanics section of the game. But essentially, it's like this. Imagine that this is your card, okay? You can either have it in attack mode or defense
That's
mode.
what is chocolate.
Essentially, like when you summon it, it's either in attack mode or face down defense. That's the generic, unlike back in the anime where you can summon it in defense mode like that. Let's just say the anime and the actual card game are two different things. But what you see on TV is there.
It's not an actual.
Exactly. Well, most of it.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
But, of course, the main component most of the time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is you have to battle your opponent's monsters. So, since, for example's sake, now, let's say I go into battle phase. From my draw phase, main phase, to battle phase. So, essentially, like, example, I have 1600 attack, right?
Yes.
And you have 0. So, I attack you, and since he has 0,
But he can counter attack.
unless it says in her effect that there is something that she can do, like for, and that's where it gets technical.
Okay, like
because just for clarity's sake, lang, it's a in the battle phase there's entering battle phase, then there's damage step, damage calculation after the.
and combat.
Yes. So essentially, when a monster dies, it goes to the graveyard. And we'll get to the placements when we go into actual dueling.
But anyway, so that's basically having this one to defend, and for example, you have these defense points.
Yes. Let's
So
take
do we go to? Do we still leave this one because this is 1600 and this one is 1800?
Good question. You see, when, let's say for example, like I attack this face down, right? Of course, you have to flip it face up,
So black.
and that's when the damage calculation
yes.
is. So since the defense of Ash Blossom is higher than my attack, so I take the damage, the difference, basically. So the difference is 200 points. So so it subtracts from my life points.
That's what it's really right?
Yeah, I know. I didn't do Yu-Gi-Oh for the math. Right?
So it's nuts.
But anyway, back to what I was
Let's
saying.
discuss the
Anyway, like I said, aside from the monster types, there's also like certain specific monsters that have, well, how should I say this? I guess you could say they're also monster subtypes as well.
sometimes.
Yeah, they call it tuners. There's tuners, that is for the synchro plays. That's another story.
That's another
Mhm.
primary deck strategy for that
Yeah,
explanation. Okay.
exactly. So essentially, there's a boatload of stuff doing. There's a lot of things.
Then we have to.
Okay, okay, of course. Next, we have spell cards. Well, here's a funny story though. In terms of since it's Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh. Back in the day, like pre 2005, I think. There was before like the original Yu-Gi-Oh. They call it Magic cards.
Magic card.
Yeah, it literally said Magic.
Magic.
Card.
Up until
I think I have.
we had
I
we had the trademark.
that actually is a very controversial thing.
But we still have those kind of old cards.
Yes. So, just to explain again, back in the day they were called magic cards, as you
It's
can.
literally made name.
Yeah, literally. Even in the anime, they called it magic
Magic
cards
card.
from the first few seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh. But of course, these are like some of the first few sets from starter decks, that kind of stuff. So, if you actually notice it now, they're called spell cards because of a certain complaint/lawsuit Well, that's another story for another day. Just to bring it up a little bit. But in terms of types of spell cards, you have, of course, your normal spell card, which is technically you just put it on your spell and trap zone activation, and technically, yes, it will resolve. And of course, there's another spell. Sorry, there's another type of spell card called Quick Plays. Essentially, they kind of act like trap cards. You can either activate them from your hand on your turn, or you can set them, and then on your next turn you can. Because essentially, general rule of Yu-Gi-Oh is, unless your normal spell cards, you can activate it even after you set it. But if it's like quick plays, you can't. You have to keep it like
to start it.
You have to set it down. Yes. So essentially, I think in Magic also you call these instants, right? Essentially.
Yeah. But instance can be done at any time that you have the mana to cast it.
I see.
Does not really need to be activated at a certain turn. But at any time, for example, if you only cast a spell, you need to. You want to resolve it first, or you have to cast the instant? That's good. That also depends. So, in your case, you need to put it face down.
If you choose to do so, or let's say.
But there are some cards that you would need to have it face down.
Yes.
Cast it or something.
Exactly. But then again, this is where we get into the third general card, so to speak. You have monsters, spells, and of course trap cards. Trap cards, by its definition, of course, like the anime said, "Ha! You fell into my trap card."
Sorry to disappoint you, Yugi. Huh? You triggered my trap card!
Man down.
And there are three basic types of trap cards. Basically, there's the normal ones, which have basically no other symbol. You just activate it as it is. You set it first, then you activate it, and
activate the opponent's attack.
Yeah.
Or
attack, or depending on its conditions. As example, some of the trap cards, like this one, Infinite Impermanence, it actually negates the effect of one monster in your opponent controls.
So it would be activated during their turn.
And this is one of the more unique things, because it's also considered a hand trap. Because if you control no cards, let's say your opponent goes first. Let's say you go first. You activate an effect, I can actually activate it from hand if I have no cards, thereby negating said effect of the monster. Exactly. So, but of course, hand traps are another discussion for another day. Oh, before I forget, this is going to be another version of a trap. Is called continuous traps. This is actually the one that has the infinity symbol. So basically, once you activate them, they stay on the field as long as it's and as long as it's on the field, the activation.
I see. There's the activation up until the whole turn, or
basically, as long as it's on the field, the effect stays. So unless you destroy it, that's another thing.
But the opponent can destroy it.
And of course, spell cards also have them too. I don't have a continuous spell right now because most spells get destroyed anyway. Exactly. And of course, the final one is called the counter traps. Technically,
with a symbol.
Yes, okay. The arrow. Technically, they call these counter traps. This is technically one of the, well, not just basic, but also the highest in terms of
level.
Yeah.
Single tape power level.
Essentially, we call it spell speeds. Technically, we call it spell speeds. Technically, it's kind of like this. Essentially, I activate a spell, right? Speed spell, speed spell 1. Quick plays are speed spell 2, and more or less trap cards are speed spell 3s on a normal day. Or sometimes you can actually go for speed spell 1 on a trap. Then let's say your opponent has a counter trap that actually
can go ahead and do the effect first before or just counter the effect.
Essentially, the only thing that can actually outdo a counter trap is another counter trap, because that's the highest speed.
same spell speed. I'm like,
So essentially,
spell speed. You hit that, but you have spell speed.
exactly. I can't wait for I can't wait for the Yu-Gi-Oh community to call me out of my bullshit. Anyway. Anyways, but I guess we'll get into that in another time regarding chain mechanics. That's another story for another day. Okay, so essentially, also in terms of types of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's the other types of monsters as well. There is the fusion cards, which is technically another type of summoning. We have synchro monsters.
I synchro summon Junk Gardner in defense mode.
Synchro what?
Synchro summon.
What summon?
Synchro summon.
What?
Synchro summon.
Oh, what's that?
It's where you play a monster.
Wait, I seem to have stopped caring.
That was a nice synchro summon, you say?
Synchro what?
What do you mean by synchro?
Synchro monsters were introduced in around 2007-2008, the third anime, which was 5Ds. The way it works is you need one tuner and one non-tuner. Depending on the monster, sometimes it needs two, sometimes it needs, depending on the requirements.
Yeah.
And this is where a little bit of math is involved. So since this is a level 8, oh wait, level 9, see? I can't read. This is technically like a do you remember?
Slide?
Yeah. See?
Nine.
I need glasses too. This is a level 9. So essentially, its requirements is one tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters. Non-tuners are basically any monster that is not a tuner.
Alright.
So you have to, let's say you use this. Like Ash Blossom is a tuner, so level 3. You're gonna need at least another monster with that can equivalent that level.
So you compare the number of circles, right? So for this one,
Yes.
we would subtract, and they would need 6 more.
Yes.
This.
Yeah,
Or
essentially like
non-tuner with the 3 or what it does depend.
You can actually have more, you can actually have more non-tuners. Essentially like it's kind of like 3 plus let's say 6. Then I need to have another level 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
So essentially like that, and then a little bit of math.
Math, yeah.
And of course, moving on, this is another odd thing after the synchro era. This is called well, this is much more easier. The Xyz monster. Now, these are not levels. Technically, these are ranks.
Oh,
They call it ranks. And
it's just another
summon and another monster type
interactions.
from your extra deck. I might add. Remember, basically we'll get also to that in the mechanics video. You see, I told you Yu-Gi-Oh was freaking complicated. But it's fun, but it's complicated. I mean, just being honest, all right?
Meta this, meta that. Have you ever met a fucking girl before?
Anyway, so Xyz basically what they do is they're basically ranks, and they usually have simple requirements. Like example, if they say, for example, 2 level 8 monsters. So if ever you have 2 level 8s, just for example's sake, no, these are not level 8s, but just for example, if you have 2 level 8s, what you do is you declare like, oh, okay, I will Xyz summon, in which you put it beneath the card, like a sandwich. Yeah, like a sandwich on top. Yeah, and it's like a sandwich. Essentially, that's how you Xyz summon.
So you would need at least 2.
Yes. Like most monsters from the extra deck, whether it may be Link, Xyz, Synchro, Fusion, depends on their requirements. As long as you fulfill those.
So the deck build would have been composed of the right kind of
Yes.
combination.
Exactly. Well, example again, like fusions, you would normally use the spell card polymerization or its other cousins.
Same, and this one.
Oh, these. This is a little bit controversy. These are actually Japanese cards, or OCG. OCG cards are usually in the Asia region.
That's region specific lang.
So But of course, I think I'll just include that on the other because that's another story entirely. My God, that
Can we consider them as another card type or
no. Technically, they also have their own TCG counterparts, which is technically the same thing, but it just has English text.
okay?
Or if you're in Europe, sometimes, and this
Yeah.
is where it gets funny in Yu-Gi-Oh. In some regions, technically, you can use some of the TCG cards from, like, let's say you're from Europe, you have the Spanish version of said card.
Ah.
There are some tournaments that actually allow, since it's part of the TCG. Just like, but in here, like example here in the Philippines, if you want to join like qualifiers, you need Japanese cards. But we're an open community as far as I remember.
So you would still have those English and
Yeah.
maybe Japanese combinations.
Yeah, but it's like it's not a question naman of authenticity or something like that. Unless you really want the printed cards, that's a different story na eh. Siyempre, bawal ang fakes sa mga tournaments as much as possible unless
Like use proxy fakes.
unless kung casual play, yun ba rasunan ka pa na sa ibang casual play.
We do this casually.
Yeah.
If it goes in the market, then that's a problem.
Okay. Going on, this is an example of a pendulum monster. It's technically a pendulum exist, but for reference sake, this is a pendulum monster. Now, on a normal day, pendulum monsters are they usually when they're in your yep. These two actually are
You just use if let's say go ahead. On a normal day, you would just follow this.
Yeah. Yeah, on a normal day, essentially how you summon, there's a thing called pendulum summoning, but there are only a few people who use that, I think.
Right, it's not effective or
Oh, no, it's effective, it is. It's just that people like me don't really use it. Example,
it's just complicated.
I'm just gonna refer this from the beginner's guide. Essentially, like, pendulum monsters are technically, you could use them as a monster or you could use them as a spell card. Hence why they look half and half.
Let's see.
So it's kind of like a hybrid spell
Okay.
slash
It's a
monster.
creature and the spell itself.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, if they have these things called scales, which is on their left and right thing.
Yeah, but
Essentially, let's say this is scale 4, right? Now, if you have another pendulum scale or monster, actually, you put it on the other side of the field. Let's say it's pendulum scale 8, for example. You can special summon monsters from pendulum, like for example, see, this is where I get confused. Essentially, it's going to be like you can special summon monsters from your hand or pendulum monsters from your extra deck, in which this is another funny mechanic. As long as it's in between the scales. So, level 5 to 7 monsters, you can pendulum summon them. You see what I mean? It's too...
You just go with the layman's term. You can do someone from the extra deck.
Extra deck and your
within the
hand,
range.
technically, yeah. Within the
That's
range,
within the
as long as it's in between the scales.
Within scales.
And of course, then it goes to your... I'll just save all that explanation. And of course, the current generation of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, or dual monsters, as we used to call them.
Before.
Well, technically, in the anime terms, it's called dual monsters.
Dual monsters.
But of course, in real life, it's basically Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah. Villains.
Kasi there's also another card games called, I think there was also Duel Masters.
Dual Master Lab.
That was another thing. That's technically kind of different. And of course, Link monsters. Now this is the current generation of Yu-Gi-Oh cards as we speak. So Link.
Some kinds of
So if you notice,
same interactions.
in a way, they're yes and no, because if you notice, they don't have defense. They can never be in defense mode.
Okay.
So essentially, Link's, this is kind of like one of those tech-savvy cards that they used to do. Like, for example, how do you summon a typical Link monster? For example, in my Gokis, it needs at least 3+ Goki monsters, and it has to add up to Link 4.
So those monsters should have
Essentially, like
one,
essentially,
4 or just
you can have there's
3
actually
with ones.
there's actually like a few ways to summon it like this, as long as it's Gokis. So I'm gonna be specific.
It's about time to step up my game. With a game changer, I'm gonna be needing at least 3 Gokis to link summon. So I sent Goki tag partners Suprex and Jet over in the Link Arrows to bring out the most powerful wrestler in my deck. You ain't ready for this, Varus. I link summon Link 4, Goki the Giant Ogre.
So you can have like at least 4 Goki monsters. Like for example, four of the different types of Gokis. For example, send them to graveyard. You can link summon it to your extra monster zone.
I see.
But there's also other ways. Let's say if you have lower linked monsters. For example, you have this. You can use a link to Goki Heal Ogre.
So use this one to
You can actually use this to actually, since it says only 3 plus Goki monsters, you can use this plus 2 other Gokis to summon the Link 4. Since it's already linked 2, so you can actually add 2 more Goki monsters to have this
if you have
Link
the
4.
0 hand, you basically have 2 of those cards to be able to summon this. So when you summon this,
Basically, that's from the extra deck.
this is for the extra deck. So
Yes,
that is
from the
for
extra
the-
deck, yes.
Okay.
Like most like fusion
Same
synchros.
with this one. Other one.
Yeah, fusions, fusion synchros,
So,
and
So
some pendulums and some links. Unless it says from there.
so how many cards is the extra deck?
Okay, that's a good question. 15.
Okay, so they're basically composed of those high-level monsters now.
Not necessarily high level. Some of them are actually low level, but they have awesome effects.
Yeah, but you would need the main deck to get the link.
Exactly. Yes. So essentially, unless your opponent stops you,
Or counter it.
and of course, we also have a thing called side decks. So it's kind of like it's also 15 cards. So let's say
you can control that sideboard. Even in between games, you would need
yes.
to side out your less efficient cards that became your sideboard cards.
In order to counterattack the.
So that's your.
You also practice in Magic 2 out of 3, right?
Yes, best of 3.
Best of 3 as well. Yes. What? Here's an interesting thing. Now, I'm sure people will be interested to hear it. What's your time limit per match?
That's basically 60, and we would have the last 5 turns to be done. If no one wins within the last 5 turns, it would be a draw.
Essentially, in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like 40 minutes. And believe me, some people would actually go overtime just to piss people off. that is true.
It's kind of stalling, diba?
Exactly.
Stalling the game,
But
there are just cards that has very complicated, can say as complicated effects that can basically.
Sometimes they take too much process. Like for example, there are some archetypes that their turn 1 alone
can have very.
It's like you can have a complete board and have a complete lockdown setup and okay, I'm done. Then that took like 10 minutes. So essentially, that's pretty much the gist of some of the cards of Yu-Gi-Oh. I know it's kind of like it's a little too much, isn't it?
Yes, too much text. But again, kind of get the deck types video gets gonna. But can the anime help the gameplay?
Essentially, like the anime provides a lot of like inspiration in the sense like if you want to play in that kind of format, yeah. But then again, to me, it's kind of like
the anime, so.
like for example, for me, Link monsters to me were kind of weird. I'm sure like in most people have, but the anime kind of helped in getting it out there. But of course, when the formal rules apply, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Poptopia PH Iloilo is a very awesome store that can cater to all your hobby needs. If you want trading card games, Funko Pops, card sleeves, binders, all that awesome stuff from various card games and all your hobbies galore. Sir Mark Ian Alloso, also known as Deathmarked, I will leave a link in the description below as well to his YouTube and Shopee channels, so feel free to check them out as well.